This week, Jason Lassourreille from Sophos is with us to discuss MDRs and Self Sabotage. Then Chris Sanders from Applied Network Defense joins us to talk about SecOps, training practitioners, and detection woes. Finally, in the enterprise security news, we've got funding, we've got acquisitions, we've got breaches. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll throw your phone across the room. Gmail really wants to make sure you're you. CISA really wants to help out open source and public utilities. Vendors are hiring. Brazil might have the most expensive breach ever, and the government did it to itself on purpose. Why are you logging into production hosts? Modern cars are privacy nightmares, detecting deepfakes, and cloning yourself. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra, F-O-R-T-R-A. If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today. Visit securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Sober Day. This is episode 331, recorded on Thursday, September 14th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the acolyte of Apple, the Prince of Poutine, the most apologetic CISO, and my favorite emergency co-host, Guillaume Ross.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm in an office for the first time since probably like 2019 or something. So, weird podcast setup for today, but super happy to be here.
Yeah, very happy for you to be here. And it's it's interesting. I don't know if it's intentional that National Sober Day is a couple days before the keg tapping ceremonies for Oktoberfest, but that seems like it couldn't be coincidence.
I'm just drinking water. We have a really good water machine over here.
Yep, same. Drinking water. There's nothing wrong with being sober, even if it's for one day or a week or all the time. But yeah, it's good to have days that make you think about hitting the reset button on things. Quick announcement here. Join our Discord channel to chat with our hosts, ask questions, customize live stream alerts, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite. And just a quick note there, we have a bot that will copy your comments from YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn, or any of the other places that we're live. So you can send something in the Discord right now and I'll see it. And it will distract me from what I'm saying. Don't abuse it, please.
You're setting yourself up for getting trolled right now. I love it.
I know. I'm already regretting saying that, but we'll see. We'll see. It's always fun to have an active audience, live audience. So this interview is sponsored by Sophos, and I love the title of today's topic is MDRs and Self Sabotage. We're excited to have Jason Lassourreille, senior engineer from Sophos, with us today. Jason has been in the tech industry for 15 years, and 5 of those at Sophos. He currently acts as a technical resource for new and existing customers. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We are thrilled to have you here. Yeah. So, an interesting topic, and kind of building on a previous episode we have. If you go back to episode 321, we had a great discussion about managed detection and response. When we say MDR, that's what that's an acronym for, with Andrew Mundell. So that's I assume you saw that episode, Jason, or
Absolutely.
maybe not?
Absolutely. And Andrew's one of my good friends, and I would even say mentor in a lot of ways.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. So this is, I love the position you're in, because you do get to see kind of where the rubber hits the road quite a bit. The real problems customers are trying to solve. It seems like it would be a very satisfying role to be in, because you kind of get that full life cycle, that full loop of, okay, hey, we've got a problem, and then you tell them, how you can help them solve that issue. And either they do or they don't, but you get the feedback. You're not just like throwing code into the void and hoping people are enjoying the product.
Well, in past roles that I've been in, I've seen a lot of shelfware, right? They buy a product to meet a solution, or they're, hitting a checkbox. It's nice to be able to not only position a solution, but also follow up with them to make sure that it's doing its job, making sure that they're leveraging it to its full capabilities. And making sure they're not putting themselves in a position that undermines their investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great topic to talk about today, because, I think there are a lot of good products there. I was actually involved, my good friend Javad Malik did a report on shelfware back in 2014 when we were both co-workers at 451 Research. We were both industry analysts there. And we did a survey where we surveyed both buyers and sellers. And it was interesting seeing where the fingers were pointed at each other. And when we asked a question, why does stuff end up on the shelf? And the vendors are like, well, the customer's not listening to us, and blah, blah, blah. And the customer's saying, well, this thing is impossible to implement, and the supports that. It was just great kind of seeing the gripes aimed at each other. But you got kind of a sense for, okay, clearly a lot of it's communication, and a lot of it's, I think positions like yours, making sure that you've got, folks on the team that are there when the customer needs assistance, and kind of prevent them from foot gunning themselves.
Absolutely. And, a lot of the clients that I work with on a day-to-day basis, I tend to work with organizations that are sub 1,000 for the most part, sub 1,000 users. And the IT managers there, or the team, tends to be very limited. And I tend to work with a lot of people who are the IT manager, the storage admin, the network admin, the server admin, and the janitor on nights and weekends, right? So they're trying to do some really complex security protection, and they're trying to implement some tools, oftentimes to meet compliance or cyber risk insurance needs. And they're also still trying to do their day-to-day errands, and something has to be backburnered. Unfortunately, it winds up being security often. MDR can help that, but it's still something that people have to stay on top of and make good choices when they're working throughout their day.
Do you feel like, because it's MDR as opposed to, selling just traditional antivirus or EDR on its own, because there's more of a service component to it, people tend to deploy it and keep using it and making sure that it's in a decent state of, coverage of their environment and all that than they would if it was only EDR that they bought?
That's a great question. I think managed detection and response really drives conversations with IT, teams and our teams, because we're giving them continued communication. And really, this is true for a lot of MDRs out there. But speaking from experience, because we're giving them continued communication, we're giving them reports on their overall health and overall positioning, because we're trying to interact with them around suspicious behavior top of mind. With traditional endpoint security, the biggest thing that I hear is, oh, it's working great. I haven't had an alert in years. That's not necessarily a sign of something working. I do a lot of health checks and working with organizations, look at their policies and their exclusions. And even just yesterday, I was talking to a client who hadn't touched their policies since 2018. And I know for a fact they're not the same organization they were back then.
Yeah, and these exclusions, you always add new ones. You never remove the old ones, and first thing you know, it's been 17 years and the C drive is excluded.
Right. I've run into C drive exclusions. Doing some investigation, we feel it might have been an employee who was a little bit unhappy with their organization before leaving, but I've seen that. And with Sophos, we do have a health check section that can show them dangerous exclusions and policy creations that might put them at risk. But a lot of people don't look at that consistently either. What they try to do is address whatever alert is top of mind now. And that alert could be something from their firewall. It could be an alert from their endpoint, but it could just as easily be an executive whose, Mac Mini is acting funny, right? It could be someone who's having some issues with one of the tools that they need, and security gets pushed farther back. I've seen a lot of exclusions for products that don't exist any longer. The company was acquired and sunset years ago, but we still have an exclusion in there. And that doesn't provide a huge risk. But when we're seeing more of these living off the land techniques from attacks, and we're seeing legitimate tools being used in malicious ways, or even tools that we know have vulnerabilities that aren't being patched any longer, it opens up a larger door than people expect. And the first place that organizations go for exclusions are global exclusions. They don't do policy exclusions, even though they're available, right? And those are the exclusions that can pertain to individual users or group of users or individual computers and groups of computers, limiting that exclusion scope. They tend to go for the easiest button or the easiest tool. And it really becomes a hammer most of the time. They do a global exclusion that covers every machine, and they don't understand what the scope of that exclusion really means to them.
Is that one of the things that's missing here? Because something I got kind of excited about was breach and attack simulation tools, and I think they kind of ended up being more noisy than I hoped they would be. But that hits me as an example of something where if you make too big of an exclusion, all of a sudden you've got some tooling that automatically checks to see if you're actually going to catch lateral movement or something like that. And a configuration change shoots you in the foot, and it comes up and says, "Hey, look, now I can do this, and I can see your detection environment is blind to it." Is that something that you guys would help them with by manually doing that, or do you have customers that have breach and attack simulation products that do this?
Well, with our solution, what we do is we do look for overly broad exclusions and specific tools that are risky. One of the biggest ones is globally excluded PS exec and PS kill, right? Legitimate tools. But,
oh, geez.
Right? For the people who know, they're used more often for malicious activity than they are legitimate activity any longer.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
I
exactly.
usually tell people if PS exec works in your environment from one laptop to another, you have a lateral movement problem. Like, it's really good at knowing that there's something that needs to be locked down a little more.
Right. So we notify those. That's part of our standard operating procedure. But there's a limit to that scope, right? If we start alerting on everything that's dangerous, we start running into some problems. We can't always limit PowerShell because organizations live on PowerShell executions and they live on their scripts. And we can decide certain scripts might be malicious, but other scripts are suspicious. Now, MDR can help, but if we're excluding PowerShell from global detection, it makes it that much harder. We have to start inferring activity instead of directly observing it. Or if they are excluding a drive because someone said it was slow at one point. Well, great. Is it still slow? What year was that? And what were we doing, or what were you doing that was causing that slowdown? Was it because it was a driver conflict with an application you're using? Was it because you're using a lot of IOPS on a physical spinning media? How can we identify what the root causes that is results from that without having to just exclude it? There are some really good tools out there that can help organizations identify, overly broad exclusions and specific types of applications. We're embedding a lot of that technology within our products. For instance, with InterceptX Advanced, our endpoint protection, we have a brand new feature set called Adaptive Active Adversary Protection. And that's designed specifically for living off the land techniques, unsigned EXEs and DLLs, that lol bin type of attack, where when we see that activity on a specific machine, we can enforce more restrictive policies temporarily, blocking that activity, and if not, kicking them out of the environment, delaying the attack so that it gives time for the incident response team, whether it's ours or the client's, to take action. And if that attacker tries to pivot, we can then put some additional exclusions in place, trying to stop them at every turn. And that's been really effective.
So that's much more dynamic than what people are usually used to. I'm wondering, I've worked in a bunch of different types of companies, so I've seen, environments where, there's a lot of false positives. Why? Because, I don't know, some engineering team actually makes Windows software. We still have a 32-bit version of something, actually looks super suspicious when they do a local build, that type of stuff. But I was wondering, you probably have much more visibility into a lot of different environments. What are the environment types where you need the most custom configurations? Is it ICS? Is it manufacturing? Like what type of environment requires the most fine-tuned deployments?
That's a great organizations that tend to leave themselves open to risk more than others. I find like manufacturing and like printing and production tend to rely on really old devices because that came with whatever type of machinery they were using, right? So I walk into environments quite often where they've got a Windows 7 device that's connected to a special piece of hardware. That Windows 7 device is still on the network and they can't touch it because that's the only copy of this software that will run this machine. So then, and Windows 7 hasn't been supported in quite a while now, and we've recommended against having it. But now we have to have something else in place, right? Is it through a network detection response option? Are we looking through just firewall policies and trying to segment it as much as we can? Like, what are some of the other steps that we can take to mitigate that? And then also it's the development teams. I find that organizations that have a more sophisticated dev team, but are trying to run lean and mean, tend to do riskier things. A lot of unsigned code, a lot of applications that they custom created, but they never validated the integrity of it. They never validated what else could happen by leveraging this tool. And I see a lot of abuse with that out there. And then it's also just the organizations that are where they acquiesce to their clients' demands. That's probably one of the biggest thing. Someone within that organization was squeaky enough to have something turned off, whether they were turning off certain detections because that user just complained so often, even though they were engaging in risky behavior, they had to do something to, allow them. That user could be an executive. It could be someone who's just valuable enough and noisy enough that we're having to make these changes. And instead of doing it for that individual and then monitoring it with an EDR, right, or an XDR tool, extended detection and response, they create a global exclusion and open up a larger window than they need to.
Would these be the environments where you would use these more dynamic policies to kind of, sometimes these exclusions, there's definitely a need for it, right? Like you said, they buy 100%. Manufacturing hardware and it comes with like this weird Windows 98 machine or whatever. But then can you use these more dynamic rules to kind of mitigate the risk that you're creating by having these exclusions? So your day-to-day operational mode would be a little bit more open, but based on detections, you can tighten it down a little bit more. So
you can reduce risk.
Best of both worlds scenario.
Yeah, I would caution against mitigate risk. You can reduce risk, and I think a great strategy is identifying what the level of risk an organization can withstand is. Right, a lot of organizations deem a certain level of risk acceptable. And some organizations are highly risk averse. So for those organizations that are really risk averse, I don't think there's going to be a middle ground for some of those. But organizations can withstand some level of risk. Having these types of policies, right? The adaptive active adversary detection would detect things like lateral movement. It would detect an eternal blue attack, right? Coming from a machine that's not protected. We would detect some odd packet behavior. Leveraging things like tools like a network detection and response device, where we're looking at just the network traffic east-west in an environment, to see if we're having odd connections. That can all reduce risk. But at the end of the day, if the malicious behavior looks legitimate enough, it becomes difficult for us to find it until they do something that looks risky, right? If it is, if we're not looking for login behaviors, if we're not looking for login locations, if we're looking at, things that tend to look normal for an organization, it becomes a bigger haystack for us to find the needle.
Yeah, so I wanted to, talking about those exclusions, how specific can you get with those? Because your example with PSExec, maybe you have some of those PowerShell scripts are leveraging PSExec for things, or administrators are manually leveraging them. And, but the way that PSExec is used, could be something that you could set some exclusions around if you could get specific enough, right? Like PSExec being executed by, a NetLogon script or a PowerShell script or something like that's very different than like as a child process of Microsoft Word, for example. Are the tools nuanced enough that you can create exclusions like that, and you can say PSExec when it looks like an admin is okay, but any other use of it, is going to look fishy.
Yeah, tied to specific users, tied to specific login credentials, right? Tied to specific devices. You can, limit it to that. And even with an exclusion, just to be clear, if Word is executing something like that, right? If it's running like an MSHTA and it's downloading a payload, which is leading to a PowerShell execution, we see that. One of the biggest things that I recommend to an organization is if they're starting to move towards an endpoint detection response solution or extended detection response, depending on your marketing, and they're not quite looking for full managed detection response, and they're doing it in-house, the biggest thing is to leverage their EDR queries to monitor what those scripts are, to identify what normal looks like, and understand how to find anomalies. Right? If you're seeing a base 64 encoded PowerShell execution, that should raise a lot of red flags. If you're seeing even just potentially benign commands, right? A lot of who is or a lot of host name type of commands done in a time frame around certain other executions, that should also be a red flag. You should be able to maintain visibility even if you've had to exclude protection. And that's one of the things that we really try to preach is if you're going to do an in-house security operations center, or even if you're leveraging an EDR with a small team, maintain visibility over that which is critical, even if you've had to exclude some of the protection. And it's all about balancing that risk reward.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I imagine, that's a trick, right? I used to call this the customization tax, where each environment is so different. I think that's where a lot of stuff ended up shelfware is they didn't anticipate or have, especially with the companies you're talking about, 1,000 employees or less. They didn't have the time to go through and do all this detection engineering and set all this custom stuff up for their environment. Because what looks weird in one environment is totally normal in another, right?
Absolutely. Are you able to hear me still?
Yep, no problem.
Okay, because I have 3 black monitors for some reason, and I don't know why. So I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, we hear you fine.
Okay. That is a big thing, right? Is each organization is unique and different, and it becomes, and this is what makes it difficult from an MDR or even any security operations center standpoint, right? Is how do we identify what looks normal within this organization, and how do we make that generalized enough that most organizations can get value in it? So what we tend to do is have an understanding of what malicious looks like. Confirmed malicious, whether it's living off the land techniques using specific applications like TeamViewer, or we're seeing some unsigned DLLs or EXEs that are going through, or if we're seeing some RDP sessions that shouldn't be created. Identify what known malicious looks like and have that built into the product. Protect as much as we can. Then layer on the human side of things. Although AI is fantastic, we use AI in a lot of our products. AI is still really limited. I think humans are still better able to recognize abnormalities. And you'll find that a lot of organizations, their IT department has a hunch when something's going wrong. They know it doesn't feel quite right. And it could be as simple as, the fan noise in my server room is slightly higher pitched than normal, right? They tend to know their environment.
Good at detecting patterns, spotting patterns, right? Like that's something that our brains are good. Yeah.
Yeah. So having that sit-down session with an organization, and we're having them work with you to understand what normal looks like, and trying to put in place some protections and some reporting so that they can keep an eye on that normal and leverage that innate human benefit.
Yeah. So speaking of human benefit, so your role, I'm curious. You're talking about somebody still having exclusion, or haven't checked their exclusion since 2017, 2018. Are you reaching out to customers proactively, like looking for things systematically, saying, "Hey, this looks like configuration hasn't changed in years. We should probably chat with them and take a look at this," or is it more reactive, or is it a mix of both when you work with customers?
It's a mix of both, right? So we do have some things in place to notify us early in an attack process if we're seeing behaviors on an endpoint that shouldn't be there, and we can reach out and say, "Hey, we're seeing something suspicious. We think you might be under attack. Can you investigate it?" Even with our endpoint product, that's something that we can do. But really, we're trying to, and Sophos has been doing this for a couple of years now, we're really trying to change the paradigm and not just be there at the time of sale, at the time of renewal. Having that relationship with organizations where every quarter we're scheduling a cadence to talk to an organization about how their environment is currently working, what are they seeing, review new features that have launched that might address concerns that they have, address complaints that they might have early in the cycle, and use that feedback to drive development and other things. Since Sophos goes directly through partners only and we don't sell direct, some of it is a little bit more reactive, where we're encouraging our partners to reach out and leverage their relationships. But a lot of it is us trying to schedule a normal cadence. Hey, customer, you purchased this 3 months ago. Were you successful in deployment? What are you liking about it? What don't you like about it? Do you want to have a quick call to validate that your deployment is in your best interest, that you don't think you have strong security, you have strong security? I've seen a lot of organizations that, they still treat it like a checkbox. I have an endpoint protection. I have, XDR tools or EDR tools. Great. How are you using them? We find that a lot of organizations that have EDR and XDR either rarely or never leverage queries to look in their environment. And a lot of it is because they don't know how to use it, and they're not actively leveraging their security tools. So that's where we have the conversation. Can we show you how to leverage those tools? Give you some training, help you think like, a security team. And if not, then maybe that's not the best solution if you have a high risk aversion.
Yeah, I mean, that can be challenging, right? Like when you've got 3 different tools that all have query languages, but they're all different languages, and they all have different data stores and table names and object names and stuff like that. I'm thinking, OS query versus Velociraptor versus Elastic. Like you almost need I can imagine people in a cubicle with just lines of cheat sheets with all the query languages surrounding them. So it can be challenging. I can totally get people not using it just because there's such a learning curve to get over.
Well, and it reminds me very much of back in the day when, and not to call any manufacturers out, but when you would go from working on a Cisco switch and to another manufacturer's switch that swears that their code is Cisco compatible, right? And then you would find that there's nuances to commands that aren't quite right. And you're having to figure out, like, all right, how is the syntax slightly different? We've experienced stuff like this. It's starting to converge, I think, a little bit. And where we are seeing some benefit is MDR solutions that are bringing in third-party tools into the ecosystem. Several years ago, Sophos was very siloed in what our MDR can do. We were primarily looking at our tools. That has changed for quite a while now. We're able to ingest data from other tools, whether it be their firewalls, their NDR, their identity, their email security solution, pull in that event data, pull in that threat data, normalize it because no one, quantifies it the same way, and then start trying to identify those trends, those commonalities, and really look into their the security situation. Cybersecurity sprawl is real. A lot of organizations have 20 plus different tools from different manufacturers, and all of them have a different UI, a different syntax, leverage different queries. Heck, maybe they're on just a different version of OS query, and there's a new table versus an old table that they were used to. It gets complicated. So I think integrating is a big step in that direction.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, not to throw AI too much into the conversation here. I know there's a lot of hype, but one of the most compelling use cases I've seen is I've seen folks demonstrate with it, write me a Yara rule to check for this, and that, or, even like very specific languages specific to one SIM vendor. I've seen where ChatGPT and other LLMs can perfectly format that for you. So maybe some of these LLMs could be, could be an interface for that, where, you're just telling them which system you want to query for this, and they're kind of that translation layer, that Babel fish, so to speak.
Nice reference. So
it is literally that, right?
Oh, exactly. Well, and I think you're onto something. That's probably where I'm most excited about AI. We've been leveraging AI to look for patterns and behaviors, and we're looking at it to find impersonation emails, or we're using it to identify new threats. I think the next spot for AI that's really interesting is really twofold. One, leveraging it to create queries for you, or create the code that you need. I know I leverage it for PowerShell scripts or SQL scripts all the time. My SQL programming is not great. So I definitely cheat in and review. But what I'm hoping for within the next couple of years, and I've seen some demos of it, there's been talk internally about it, and I've also seen some organizations at their conferences start to showcase this, is the natural language query. Right, where I can just ask a question, show me which interfaces are doing X, or show me what behavior is Y, and it does all of the back end for you. That's really exciting, because once we can make the complex code more approachable, we're going to have a higher rate of adoption. It's going to be, I think, the same impact as going from straight CLI to GUI. Now, I know there's still CLI purists, and I'm in terminal all the time on my Linux box, so I get it. But for vast adoption, moving from command line to GUI was revolutionary, even if at first it limited what we can do. Now it's ubiquitous. I think having that AI be able to do the natural language queries is really going to take it to that next step. Yeah.
And nothing ever really gets completely displaced, right? We still need command line. It's great for automation. Automating GUI is much harder. But I think for learning, it's also going to be important, right? So I don't want to turn this into a JupyterOne product pitch, but we actually release that. We have that natural language for saying, hey, this is what I want to know, and it'll convert it into the right query. So yeah, you can run it and then find out what you were trying to find out, but also that helps you learn how you would query it directly, right? And which is at some point will allow you to customize it more, right? So if you want to learn to code like Python, ChatGPT is actually great for showing you examples and like coming up with pretty simple code blocks and all that. So if it speeds up the speed at which it improves the speed at which people can learn about security. Like for example, you want to look at a Windows machine and you want to know, did someone log in via remote desktop? If you do incident response all the time, you know exactly what event IDs you're looking for, right? But an LLM could tell you about that pretty easily.
Yeah, and I'm a strong proponent that anything that drives additional adoption and utilization is a good thing, right? As much as I love, API calls and command line and stuff, and there's always a place for that. But average Joe organization isn't doing that. They want to just be secure, and they want to be able to validate that things are working and question if something looks funny, is it something that's malicious? Now, MDR definitely helps with that, but at the end of the day, being able to do that in a really natural way, I think is going to drive better adoption and better utilization of the tools that they have.
It's probably for these organizations that are under 1,000 people that are not tech companies, this is probably not something that a lot of them want. But I feel like especially on the endpoint side, there's way less automation than on the server side, right? So there's a lot of companies now using tools like Terraform, trying to automate most of their back end, right? Like no touch ops, that kind of stuff. Are you starting to see people want to configure a tool like their EDR or their MDR using something like Terraform? So, someone can just have it as infrastructure as code, someone makes a change, it gets approved, and it gets deployed? Or is that still maybe a little too modern for most of these organizations?
It's starting to get there, right? Tools like Ansible and stuff are starting to become more common tools. Sophos has our Sophos Factory product. We got it through an acquisition. We're initially leveraging it to help automate our internal MDR teams and processes, but we have a community edition and we're launching it as an actual product. And we're starting to get people asking about it, trying it out and testing it. And we're seeing some decent adoption, even from a community version of the tool. I think we're going to move that way. Servers are much easier, right? Because you can eliminate the human element for the most part with a server, and having infrastructure as code is a little bit more elegant on the infrastructure side than it is going to be on the endpoint. You're always going to have some of those roadblocks of your unique endpoint user. But we're starting to see that, especially when it comes to automating response actions. Currently, if you have just straight EDR from any manufacturer, it's providing you information, but it's not giving you necessarily how to take those steps to do it. Whereas, some of the automation tools can. When I'm talking to clients about what their tools do for them, EDR is like if I dropped a truckload of tools in your garage and says, you know what, you've got everything that you need to dismantle, rebuild, and maintain a vehicle. Have at it. How many people can do that? MDR is that pit crew, right? That's monitoring an environment, that's telling you what's going to happen before it happens. You've got a vibration out of turn 2. We want to pull you in and change some tires, or we're noticing some odd wear here and there. We can pull you in, diagnose, repair, get you back out as quickly as possible, and maintain that level of control. But some organizations aren't looking for having that hosted, although we think a lot will move that direction. Having that automation will start to bridge that gap. But a lot of the organizations I talk to are probably a good 5-6 years from moving that way. They're still trying to get themselves leveraging just deployment tools, right? Deploying through group policy consistently, or using, PDQ deploy to push applications, or even do some patch management. They're still kind of in that infancy stage to full automation. But in the next 5+ years, we're definitely going to see an adoption of that.
So before we wrap up here, Jason, I want to get from you, maybe you can just kind of hit some highlights of some of the things where, clearly there's a lot of incremental improvements, you can see in your detection engineering and the work that you're doing with clients. But I suspect there's some big leaps, some big mistakes you can use, or that you can make that prevent you from getting anywhere. Right, like I think we've all heard implementation horror stories where IDSs are plugged into the wrong span port, or EDR never receives a policy, so it sits there with just with nothing to do. It's just running and
I think my craziest one for that was asking for a hash to be allowed, and it became the only hash that was allowed. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of examples like that.
Yeah.
So What are some of the common things that customers should be careful not to do that you see tripping people up? Right at the beginning of the process. That face plant right out the door.
So the first one is always test internally first. Have some machines that are running your normal workload that look like your average user, and make sure that you can successfully deploy and you can create strong exclusions, strong policies without having to risk the environment. I think a big thing that I see is acquiescing to all the end users' demands and not having set policies created to limit or restrict what people are able to do and bring into the organization. If you could manage the unexpected, then finding the suspicious becomes much more easy. And really what it is I think the biggest issue that I have, and I used to see this back in firewalls, where we have deployments that are in the base deployment. Now, for some tools, that's fine, but I've even seen firewalls that, they deployed a firewall, they have a firewall, the only policy in there is an allow any, and it's not restricting anything. Taking the time to not only deploy, but also validate, I think is huge. Making sure that you are getting that right telemetry, making sure it is blocking, making sure that you're able to get that visibility that you need without disrupting production. And just not everything needs to be a global exclusion. If you have a user leveraging, an access database on their endpoint, we don't need to globally exclude that location for all machines. Or if IT needs to leverage a tool like PSExec, make sure that you have it tied down to an individual user account. Make sure that admin account isn't a global admin account. And then leverage tools like EDR to monitor the use of that tool to see if you have any unexpected uses of it or unexpected code. If you have to exclude, please don't lose visibility, even if you've given up some protection. That would probably be the one thing that I talk about the most.
Yeah, very good advice. Yeah, and I suspect a lot of those kind of bad choices come due to pressure. Also, like a lot of pressure just to get somebody working, or to
Right.
just fix something. And people know, if I go with the global, I that's the easy button. That'll get it
It's
done
just done.
right now.
Yeah.
If these people off my back. So, I think then you kind of get into like having a culture that encourages you to do it the right way, even if that's going to take a little bit of extra time. And not everybody has that luxury, I don't think.
Absolutely. And if you have a partner that's willing to do the health checks with you, whether it's the manufacturer partner or someone that you work with or an MSP, take them up on it. Celebrate the victories where you have them. Have someone tell you that your policies are putting you in a good position, and take advice where you need to. I think having those relationships with those from which we've purchased products from is important, whether it's through Sophos or another manufacturer. Not just being a one and done relationship is really important in today's day and age. Monitor their blogs and their social media so that some of the things that they're looking out for and some of their recommendations. Maintain those lasting relationships with those partners that you've invested in, and try to take their advice wherever possible.
Well, excellent advice. Thank you, Jason, so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more. And stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk SecOps and practitioner education with Chris Sanders from Applied Network Defense. Are you constantly thinking about how to keep your enterprise as secure as possible? Get to know Chrome Enterprise, the trusted browser for security-conscious professionals like you. Its ease of use for IT and security teams and added access controls protect the remote, extended, and hybrid workforce, keeping your entire enterprise safe. Don't settle for a browser that compromises your organization. Visit securityweekly.com/Chrome Enterprise now to learn more and start protecting your enterprise like never before. Cyber threats target digital identities. Do you know who or what is accessing your company's apps, systems, and data? You need to know who's there, who to let in, and who to keep out. And you'll need more than access management to stay secure. You need SailPoint Identity Security. As the leader in identity security, SailPoint can help mature your security resilience while driving efficiencies and compliance for your organization. Start your identity journey with SailPoint's free maturity assessment. Go to securityweekly.com/SailPoint to get your free identity security assessment today. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Security Weekly listeners, InfoSec World 2023 is just weeks away. Have you registered to join over 2,500 cybersecurity experts on September 25th through 27th in Lake Buena Vista, Florida? That's a very long question. InfoSec World is your gateway to a world of knowledge and growth. Don't miss the chance to enhance your career, connect with industry leaders, and make an impact on the rapidly evolving landscape. Secure your seat using code ISW23-SecWeek20 to save 20% off your registration. Register today at securityweekly.com/InfoSec World 2023. All right, and today, Chris Sanders joins us to talk about detection struggles and practitioner education. Chris is one of my favorite people in InfoSec because he knows what he's talking about and freely shares that knowledge. He's the founder of Applied Network Defense, which focuses on training, particularly security operations stuff like threat hunting, investigations, incident response, and detection engineering. He's got 3 great books, at least 2 of which I think I own and have in my bookshelf, and posts weekly puzzles on Twitter. He's done a lot of great research on the intersection of cybersecurity education and cognitive psychology. He's the founder of the Rural Technology Fund, which is a really cool nonprofit that provides educational resources to rural schools and libraries, as well as physical equipment, if my memory serves. And he also has a doctorate in education and makes really good barbecue and cookies. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a great day, but I tell you, right before I went on here, I always pull up on Thursdays the Waffle House nutritional facts online just to see if the number of calories in the food has changed. And I'm disappointed to say that it's still the same. It didn't change this week, but I'm keeping an eye on it for everybody. I just want you to know.
Why Thursdays? And why are you checking Waffle House every week?
Oh, because Thursdays I go to Waffle House in the evening, so it just felt like the thing to do.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you said a lot of very nice stuff about me, and I'm very appreciative of that. But I don't know. Waffle House is on my mind, so that's where I thought I'd start.
I made you.
I learned a fun fact today. I don't know if it's true. I haven't verified it, but I'm totally going to spread the rumor that one package, container, whatever, of large fries from McDonald's, you would need to do 539 burpees to counterbalance those calories.
Ooh, that's more than one burpee per fry, which seems like a lot.
It seems like it's disproportionately. I mean, one burpee is a lot of a burpee, but 539 is disproportionately no good.
Yeah, 15 or 20 burpees per fry gets pretty egregious pretty quickly. Maybe on Thursdays you could check the McDonald's nutritional facts just to see if they change.
This sounds good.
Yeah, we could start a thing. I'm sure we could script this whole thing, but I don't know. I just take joy in doing it. So, the little things.
Would I be correct if I predicted that that graph of nutritional information, at least in terms of calories, trends upward over the years, Chris?
I feel attacked personally right now by that question, and so I'm not going to answer it.
I don't want to ruin your Thursday night meals, but you're the one checking the nutrition facts, not me.
It's not a pleasant graph, Adrian, is what I'll say.
Oh, well, at least it's Waffle House and not Cheesecake Factory. I think
that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
I think,
and while the calories may go up, the flavor goes up too, so it tastes better than it ever has.
there you go. That's the bright side. There's the silver lining right there. All right. Let's. I'm not going to have a clean pivot into the conversation here, so we'll just have to bear it and jump right in. But,
no clean eating, no clean pivot. It's all good.
Oh, there it is.
We're just completely off the rails, so I'm just gonna.
Well, I mean, it's too bad we're not going to talk about S-bomb, because that would have been the best segue ever into it. But we're talking about other stuff, right?
Oh man. S-bomb. All right. Yeah. So Chris, one of the things, I mentioned the puzzles that you do online. You've always, every time I see stuff that you're posting, you get me kind of thinking about, where we are as an industry in terms of being able to detect and respond to attacks, which has seemed impossible for so long. Like as an industry analyst, I used to track. I've always done a lot of post-mortem research, like trying to understand failures and why they happen, and particularly like watching the average dwell time, from both the Mandiant M-Trends report and Verizon DBIR and other folks that track that kind of thing, and yeah, I mean it recently dropped quite a bit because the ransom note makes it. That's the easiest detection engineering ever, right? Like I received a ransom, unfortunately. So that number dropped considerably in the last couple of years. But am I wrong in saying that I feel like we've reached a point where, detection and response, at least for kind of the, maybe not the nation state attacks, but the common variety ransomware crews, like that should be possible for most organizations today. And I know it's a very complex issue and I'm oversimplifying it. But I feel like we have some really good tools available to us today, and we figured out some of the process and things like that. And it should be possible, and kind of what I want to get into today is what's missing, how we're having trouble getting there. But like, would you agree with that statement that, do you agree that you feel like we've reached a point where the tooling is pretty good? Like, especially like when I used to go out and look at what OpenSOC was doing, they'd use all open source tools with that, and I'd have a blast going and doing the blue team CTFs with them and just being impressed with how far even free tooling has come.
Yeah. I mean, I think the tooling's advanced quite a lot. And, if we separate detection and investigation a little bit, certainly on the detection side, I think the tooling is pretty much there. We can pick at individual vendors who don't provide enough data for their products and things like that. But in terms of like network-based detection and log-based detection and things on the host as well, like the telemetry, we have the capabilities to do most of the things that we need to do to detect most types of attacks in some form or another. Obviously, the challenge is false positives, but generally speaking, we have tools that can deal with that and processes that can deal with that. And we also have kind of this more recent advent of intrusion detection honeypots, which are, when we talk about signature-based detection, those things scale up pretty well because you need people to tune and do those things, but they don't scale down so well. And the industry hasn't quite figured that out. And maybe that's something we can circle back to. But from an intrusion detection honeypot standpoint, those do scale down really, really well, and they're very simple to implement. And when you use a diversity of those techniques, that's something that's really easily deployable within small organizations. Maybe not on their own, but with the help of their MSSP folks that are helping them in that way. The detection tools really, I think, are all there. I just don't think everybody maybe knows about all of them yet, or how to effectively scale them up or down, or they're not getting to those service providers and the MSSPs that are responsible for doing this sort of work. And that's part of the battle. That's a good thing. Of course, then there's the investigation side, and that sort of things get a little bit hazier. I would say the tools for that are not really there. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, and maybe that's something we can get into, but it's a lack of existence of tools. And when we have the tools, the UX and how people interact with them is not really great. So that's probably a limiting factor as well.
Okay. Yeah. It's and just to clarify, when you say scale down, you're talking about like the initial investment of just time and money to get things up and running with that particular tool or control.
Right. I know, taking a given tool, and I know that I can throw this into a Fortune 500 and they'll have somebody on staff who can take the time to figure it out, deploy it, get it where it needs to go in some way or another. Take that same tool and give it to my local government here in Gainesville, Georgia, where, they have like 1.5 IT people, and they rely on contract work and those sorts of things. And they're just generally understaffed. Are they going to be able to do it and deploy it well and effectively and use it the way it's meant to be used? Most enterprise tools, probably not. And there's certainly a lot of reasons for that, probably the chief of which is that most of the companies making the tools build them for bigger companies because they write bigger checks. There's some kind of perverse incentives to ignore small businesses, which is unfortunate because, the vast majority of businesses in this country and many others are small businesses. And that's also going to include your small nonprofits. It's going to include a lot of your local government entities, which are obviously very important to all of our actual lives. There's a lot of companies that get hacked that it never really affects most real people, but when local government gets affected, it really does. Small hospitals, things like that. So the industry in general, I don't think has done a really good job taking care of the little guy, right? These small businesses, these small companies, these nonprofits, and making sure we have detection investigation tools that scale down in that way.
Yeah, that's we actually have a few items in the news, talking about how CISA's, trying to help out open source and make some critical open source less of like one guy's side gig, and also public utilities, also doing a lot more for public utilities. So it's nice to start to see some of that happen there. But yeah, certainly, our previous conversation, we were talking about, we didn't really touch on how the popularity has exploded. I think we did on the previous one we did with Sophos. We talked about how MSSPs and MDRs have just absolutely exploded. In the news segment, we talk a lot about acquisitions and funding and things like that. And the vast majority of that every single week are smaller MDRs and MSSPs getting picked up and consolidated. And I don't even include it because it's so much. It's like 90% of the funding news and acquisition news every week. Like there's at least 5 to 10 MSSPs or MDRs that either get some funding or get acquired every single week. It's insane.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole ecosystem. And I mean, this is kind of what happens in new industries, right? Is we kind of had this new industry where the need for our services outpaced our ability to perform the services, both from a technological standpoint and from a human educational standpoint. And so the dollars came in, right? And it's, you start this company and sell it for tremendous amounts of money. You have people with only a couple years experience making significant sums of money, more than lots of other fields that require a lot more of education. And I would argue in some facets are more important to society, like doctors, healthcare workers, teachers, things like that. It creates a weird scenario. We have this kind of balloon effect, and maybe we're seeing some of that, slow down a little bit now with a lot of what we've seen with consolidations and things of that nature. But the money got into InfoSec very, very quickly, and that kind of derailed, I think, a lot of things, and continues to, because it's hard to blame people. Like, someone develops a really great security tool, they build a small company, it's really accessible to a lot of folks, they're focused on small business, and then big company comes along and offers them tens of millions of dollars for it, and it's hard to blame people for accepting life-changing money. But it creates a weird thing, and the salary structures that go along with kind of this economic boom and so on. It's there are good things that came with that, but and it's a natural thing. It's not something maybe we could have done anything about, but gosh, it has some negative side effects that we're still dealing with, kind of in this cognitive crisis I think we're in right now.
Yeah.
Create some.
I always feel like one of the hardest type of environments to protect is education, right? Because you've got this super complex group of people. Someone could be a student, alumni, employee, teacher, all of the above. Is very, very, very confusing. The budgets are not unlimited, and then there's a lot of tools that just either don't exist or that are priced in a way that would be completely unreachable to a school or college, community college. Do you feel that training is also something that's moving towards that, or has already moved towards that, where most of the training is only ever accessible to people who work in like large organizations or governments, right? Like there's a lot of good content from SANS, for example. But if I have, someone who's 19 years old who's asking me, what training should I do? I'm not going to tell them to spend like $8,000 to go to SANS for a week, right? So do you feel like that's another area where there should be more content available at different price points?
In some ways, yes. The good thing about training education is the barrier to entry is kind of low. I mean, anybody can start a YouTube channel and start doing just YouTube videos that are educational. People can go on Twitter and do one of the things that I do and just post like challenges, investigation scenarios for people to work through and then provide feedback in those things. And education is really a simple concept. Any room with more than one person in it can be a classroom, whether that's a physical room or a virtual room. So education, I mean, there's lots of options. There are lots of lower cost options. Probably our biggest problem with the education space is really knowing what to teach. And this is a massive struggle, creating people who, work through a course or work through a program like in a university and making sure they're job ready. We do a really bad job of that. And that's one of the reasons like companies like SANS, which is a fine company. I know several of the instructors, all good friends and things like that. But that's one of the reasons they can charge such high prices is because the need is so great, right? It's how the economy works here. I think one of the beautiful things about our industry is that you can come into it from so many different paths. But probably one of the more challenging things about our industry is that you can come in from so many paths, and there's not like one set path or several set paths. If someone wants to come into the industry, you can recommend a lot of things to them, and some may work and some don't. And there's this idea of kind of like transfer. When we talk about like going to college, for instance, right? The path should probably be that you go to college, whether it's a community college or a four-year institution, and you get a degree, and when you get out, you should be able to do the job. Like not all the way, but you should be able to do most of the jobs. And some fields are very good at this. Accountants, for example, there's high transfer from accountants who get an accounting degree to the real world. When an accounting firm hires them, they know they will be able to do 80 or 90% of the job that they are being given, and the rest they will learn on the job. And information security, particularly in detection and investigation type work, it's not that way, right? People generally know that if you hire someone with a university degree in cybersecurity, they're probably not going to be able to do a lot of the meaningful parts of the job. 90% of what they're going to have to learn is going to be on the job. And that's not great. Matter of fact, it's horrible. It's not sustainable at all. It's this cognitive crisis thing. We don't have this clear pathway, this clear kind of training path into the field. A lot of that centers around what we're teaching and not knowing what we're teaching, and even expert practitioners not understanding their own thought processes. And that's something that we can dig into as well. But to kind of speak to your question and kind of this economic challenge and these really high cost courses, a lot of it goes kind of towards those types of things. There's a strong desire for the knowledge, and we haven't got it. We haven't made enough of it explicit yet. So much of it is tacit. And that's not a path forward that is going to sustain our industry, particularly at the rate we're getting our butts whooped right now.
So that brings up, I was actually having a conversation with somebody about this earlier today. It stemmed from an article I published last week or the week before. And then there's a follow-up on this about the industry and the talent shortage, or the so-called talent shortage, depending on whom you ask, and getting people into the industry. Because you brought up a point that this other person brought up, is that, when you go to school for cybersecurity, you're not necessarily ready to do the job. There's a lot of hands-on training. But this person made the observation that there are a lot of transferable skills from other areas, math, engineering, even just regular IT. And filling these jobs seems really hard, because in cybersecurity, we do a lot of, you need to have X skills versus on-the-job training and or mentoring. So my question to you is, how do you feel about that, given that there aren't a lot of entry-level jobs in security open right now? They're more mid to senior level. What are some of the things companies can do, or what are some of the things that job seekers can do if they want to transfer into security? Because as you mentioned, it's a pretty lucrative field. If you can get into the field and you're successful, you're going to have a job for a really long time, and you're going to do well financially, and that's going to be great. But how do you position yourself? And how do you hire into it if you don't have the exact right skills and can't afford $8,000 for a SANS course?
Yeah, and the thing I want to start with the thing that you mentioned, really about the lack of entry level jobs, right? And I think that is particularly a symptom of this kind of cognitive crisis that I'm talking about. Is because there's, when we say that there's a skills gap, that's not a people gap. It's not that we don't have enough people. We have enough people. We don't have enough people with the right skills. So it truly is a skills gap and not a human gap. So we have all these companies that need these people to come in right off the bat and have this skill. They need to be able to come in and take an IDS alert and run it to ground and see whether it's a false positive, whether it's a true positive, whether we need to declare an incident. They need people who can, hey, we have an incident. Can you come in? Can you go get the logs from these systems, go through them, tell me if any malicious files have been run, right? They need people who can do those hands-on keyboard actual tasks. And then all the cognitive stuff that goes with that. If you watch someone who's doing investigative work, it probably doesn't look too visually impressive, right? They're just clicking a mouse and typing on a keyboard, but it's still a very skilled performance. It's just a skilled performance of the mind, which makes it hard to observe and see and understand what's actually going on. So again, I talk about this point that most skilled practitioners within the investigative realm, so your SOC analyst, your incident responders, your threat intel folks to some degree, even if they're very good at what they do, they can't quite explain how they do what they do or what they do a lot of the times. And that's where a lot of applied research needs to be done. That's kind of my focus area and where I'm focused as well. And so, when you ask the question of what can people do to kind of pivot into this field, well, I think we're still figuring a lot of that out, right? We're still figuring out how to teach people how to do some of these core skills. Because it's, when I want someone to come in and be a responder or a SOC analyst, I don't want them to know how to use, the skill isn't use logarithm, use ArcSight, use whatever SIM, use ELK, use security on it. That's a skill, but it's not that's not where the challenge is, right? Those are just tools, and the tools are relatively easy most of the time. It's knowing, not how to type a search in or what syntax to use. It's knowing what to search for, right? It's when you get those results, knowing how to filter them, get to the most important things. It's knowing how to do some types of anomaly detection. And there's certainly lots of fields that people come from into cybersecurity where they can leverage some of their existing hardware, cognitive hardware to go forward, right? So, if you're good with numbers or problem solving, or you have really good attention to detail, if you're just naturally very curious, if you're good at, spotting, looking at lots of data and organizing and structuring that data and time management, those are all things that can be leveraged into a career in cybersecurity. There's a lot of, this is a field that I think is accessible in a lot of ways to a lot of different types of people, which is really cool. I really like that. But as an industry, we're still trying to figure that out. And I know that's not, we probably have some people listening who are like, they want the answer to that question. What can I do? How can I make this transfer? And there's tons of advice out there, right? It's getting a lab, it's being curious, it's practicing. It's deliberate practice, right? It's going through and figuring out, these are the exact skills I want to learn. These are the objectives I need to be able to do. This is the thing I need to be able to do in lots of different scenarios. And it's grinding and doing those things. We like to think security is a lot of boss fights one after another, when there's a lot of grinding in between to level up so that we're ready for the boss fights. And that's where a lot of the hard work is going to come in.
That's a great analogy. A lot of grinding. So I just want to share a quick anecdote. I mean, you basically told my anecdote right there in your description of the problem, where I had been chief incident handler and I was wearing multiple hats in my first big security gig, which was at a large payment processor. And so I'd been chief incident handler for about 4 years, and finally hired in a guy who had a degree in computer forensics. And I thought, great, I can just, this whole job of being chief incident responder, which every time we have an incident, all my other 3 or 4 full-time jobs that I have just get put on hold. I can just pass this all off to him. And I handed him an investigation, and he loads a drive image into FTK, which is what he was trained to use in school. And once that image got pulled in and analyzed, he just had no clue what to do next. Like he searched for the word password. I was like, why did you search for the word password? He said, I don't know. I just, and I realized the problem, like he had been taught to use a tool, absolutely no clue. I don't know if they even discussed like how to run an investigation.
Yeah, I went through the same thing, particularly when I was working for the military. I would go and be trying to hire analysts for the SOCs that I was running. And, I'd look at the resume, and it's like they know how to use all the right tools and all those different things. And you come in and it's like, okay, well, here's a scenario. You have, a user clicked the link, or they received an email and they clicked the link. And, what would be your investigative process? How would you go about that? And, independent of the tools, they weren't really able to articulate any of that. Right. It was a very tool-centric approach versus what should really be more of kind of an event-driven approach, or even an evidence-driven approach, where you're trying to understand what events happened, what events could happen. We call that process forecasting. And then from there, thinking about where that can manifest in evidence, and ultimately what questions you want answered. Right. My mantra is very simple. It's on the wall right there. A question well stated is a problem half solved. So, it's trying to, I wanted the analyst who could ask the right questions, because once they could ask the right questions, going out and getting the answer, very trivial. It's figuring out the tool. And once you figure out that once a couple times, it becomes very second nature. And that's kind of a rare skill, and still is. I mean, I probably talk to more SOC analyst investigators than just about anyone, because of the type of research and training and things that I do. And most SOCs, if you're talking about a SOC of 10 to 15 people, most of them have maybe 1 to 2 people who really get it, and most of the rest don't. They're just kind of going through the motions, using the tools, and they're being somewhat effective, but not nearly as effective as we would like to see, or we would expect in that way. And even the really good SOCs, if they have 10 to 15 people, it's not that they're all 10 to 15 of them are like rock stars. It's 7 to 8 of them, like it's half of them, but at least it's a critical mass. And, we could spend a lot of time talking about the characteristics of good SOCs and whatnot, but it kind of demonstrates this whole gap of where we should be and where we are not, in terms of understanding and the processes that we're using, making that knowledge explicit, and teaching it, and building companies and university programs and all those things that teach it and teach it well.
Right. So where to go from here? Like you said, we could talk more about some of the specific issues there, but one of the things I've found from doing postmortems on big breaches and things like that is I typically do find that the investment in people is fine. Like the physical people that a lot of these organizations had was fine. The investment in tools is fine. But you tend to find a lot of it seems to be missing process, or training as well. Like I can think of countless examples where, the people were there, they had the tools, but they didn't know how to use the tools, or didn't know how to use the tools in that particular example. And part of the problem seemed to me, something I come back to a lot is training. I sometimes I wonder if you've used this metaphor of thinking of, or maybe this is a bad metaphor, thinking of security teams, particularly ops teams, like a sports team, where if the first time you're doing this is during an active incident, the first time you've trained on using these tools to find things and stuff like that, it's not going to go very well. I wonder if more realistic training, might be the answer there.
Deliberate practice, right? I mean, you've got this idea that, a lot of people would say like the best training is to let's just get in an incident and do it. And imagine if you wanted to be a surgeon and like your surgery training started with just riding shotgun with another surgeon and you just start cutting on people. Stakes are a little bit different there, but I don't think we want our surgeons trained in that way. Right. There's fundamental knowledge, and to use the sports analogy, right? If you go into a basketball practice, you're not just going to see people playing 5-on-5 basketball, right? You're going to see them shooting jump shots and layups. You're going to see them running defensive drills. There was a drill I remember running at one point in my life where, to defend someone, you have to get your hands out and get really low. And the coach would put a chair under you. And he said, your butt should just barely touch that chair. And that's how you know you're low enough. Right. You don't want to be sitting on it. You don't want to be not making contact. But if it barely touches that chair, that's how you know you're low enough for a defensive stance. And that's something you don't get just playing the game. Someone could tell you that, but the chair demonstration actually drove it home. And that's the type of stuff we need. We need the other stuff. Like we need the practical stuff. We need the CTFs. We need the live scenarios with the VMs and things like that. But we also need like targeted drills and specific things to develop specific skills, right? That means little things like, being able to decipher evidence, like give me outputs from different types of evidence and have me spot the anomalies, focusing on specific techniques. Give me some straightforward ones, then try to trick me a little bit, like merge a couple of ideas together, push me a little bit further. We need more of those things, which I worry sometimes our industry is kind of moving away from. Like it's all like everybody just wants the VMs and the actual scenarios, and we need those things too. But that's not a path to getting out of this cognitive crisis. Is that doing it that way?
Right. Yeah. So speaking of, cognitive crisis, you were doing training, I think at least before your doctorate, maybe, and you're still doing it after. I wonder what kind of stuff you picked up, what kind of stuff you learned on that journey. Understanding the brain better, cognitive biases, those kinds of things. That maybe led you to change how you train people or how you structured your training classes. I wonder if you came across any interesting insights there.
Sure. Yeah. And for people who don't know my story, I spent most of my career as an analyst in some form or another. I worked in SOX, and then I ran the SOX and did consulting and research around that area. And I've always done teaching at some point throughout my career, in some capacity everywhere I've worked. So it's always been something I've enjoyed. And what I decided to do, I really wanted to learn how to do proper academic level research and get some more insights about teaching and the mind and how it works, as you said. So I went to Baylor and spent a long time there and a lot of money there, getting my doctorate, writing a dissertation, doing all those things. And it was a fantastic experience for a lot of reasons. I was certainly the only cybersecurity person in the program. I know it was a little bit of a stretch for them. And the cool thing was they were willing to learn a little bit from me as I did from them, because they knew about education and I didn't as much, but I know about cybersecurity and they didn't as much. So that was really cool. And I was also surrounded by lots of other teachers and lots of different levels, university and high school, middle school, and elementary school, all doing this type of thing, and university administrators, things of that nature. So I got a lot of perspective on that and learned a lot of different things, particularly just about how people actually learn, right? And that's, I think InfoSec people, we're all naturally curious. So I think we all are at least a little aware of our own learning, right? We call that metacognition, thinking about thinking. But I got really a deep dive into that and started, digging into that, not just for myself, but for others, because, we're all kind of, we all look at ourselves, but that's, an N of one. And, that's not a great sample size. We need to learn what works and what doesn't around other, lots of different folks. So, spent a lot of time thinking about online education and particularly adult education, because most of us, we think about how to teach people, we think about our own educational experiences. And most of our own educational experiences were when we were children, right? We spent our whole life from like 5 to 18 in school, and then maybe a little bit more when we were very young adults. But teaching and learning as an adult is different in a lot of ways, not the least of which is adults have agency. We can choose what to learn or not. We can choose whether we want to be there. We often generally need to understand why we're learning what we're learning, particularly in InfoSec, particularly for people who are paying for courses, whether they're really expensive ones, the low cost ones. They need to understand why they're doing what they're doing. I mentioned the chair drill earlier, sliding the chair into the person's butt. If a coach went and did that and put this chair here and said, just, do that, and didn't really explain why we were doing this, I would probably think they were crazy, and I wouldn't want to, I would probably go do something else. But adults need to understand, we're going to do this drill and here's why we're doing it. This is the skill that this is going to help you build. This is the scenario in which you're going to be applying it in. So, treating adults like adults and giving them that agency and, making it more of a kind of a tandem process, like we're in this together. Like, I'm not just giving you a series of videos that you watch and you go do the thing. No. You're going to watch some videos and I'm going to talk about some stuff, but then you're going to do this exercise and you're going to do this feedback and I'm going to talk to you about it. And I'm going to try to meet you where you are and push you about 10% further. Right. That's the big thing, meeting people where they are, because everybody's coming from different backgrounds and experiences. And that's what gets lost in a lot of education is just trying to figure out how to meet people where they are. So I could talk about adult education for a long time, and particularly online education and some of those different formats. But, learning the job and the task and of educating people and teaching them how to do things was certainly an enlightening thing for me. I think most people think, I know how to do X, so I'll just show someone how to do that thing, and then they will know how to do it. And it is not really quite that simple at all. There's a lot of variables, a lot of ways to structure content and material and techniques to be used, and a lot of cutting edge research on how to use online tools and things like that for that portion of it. And virtual reality is going to continue to affect that in some ways. So it was a eye-opening thing for me, career-changing thing. At some point I was thinking about just getting out of InfoSec, but when I started really going in this path, it really reinvigorated me and see the world quite a bit differently these days.
One thing I heard you talk about a little bit in what you were just saying is really the idea of taking lessons learned from other industries. And I think we as an industry tend to think, oh, we're new, we're unique. But as you're talking about adult education and continuous training and building those skill sets, you keep relating it back to other areas that have been around longer. Why do you think it is that in security we haven't relied more on those lessons learned from other industries? Because we're a fast-paced industry, but yet we're slowing down our own progress by trying to reinvent the wheel every time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And certainly we do have a lot to learn from other industries. I know when I was writing my dissertation, which I believe Adrian linked in the chat there, the industries I drew a lot from were software development, aviation, like piloting, firefighting was another big one. And probably the biggest was medicine, right? And doctors. Because if you think of doctors and diagnosis, and treatment, a lot of what they do is very similar to what we do, a lot of the same skill sets from a cognitive perspective. So there's a ton to be learned from lots of other industries. And, I think we tend to think in cybersecurity that most of the problems we face have never been faced before. And there are some ways in which that's true, absolutely. But from a thinking perspective and a reasoning perspective, not so much, right? Like it's still human thought and applying it in the right way. And InfoSec, I've been around for a while, and InfoSec was kind of born out of this nature of rebellion and kind of this counterculture thing. And I think we tend to maybe isolate ourselves a little bit too much from other industries that we could learn a whole lot from, and we tend to have a hard time getting out of that InfoSec bubble. It's a very valuable thing to be able to talk to people in other places, right? Like we're not even the only folks that do investigations, right? When I was doing my dissertation, some of my course research and things of that nature, I spent time talking to lots of doctors, lots and lots of different types of doctors, right? Particularly like infectious disease type doctors, which is a very fascinating diagnostic process. If you've ever seen the show House, that's what he was an infectious disease type doctor, and kind of this process of deduction and deductive reasoning that they use, and learning about surgeons and how they use incident morbidity and mortality conferences to improve themselves. And I'm like, this is a lot like what we talk to people about what we should do with incident response afterwards, right? I wonder where we learned it. And doing things like that. I did a couple ride-alongs with some police investigators. I talked to some lawyers who do more investigative type work, some investigative journalists. I talked to a lot of people who work for TSA, right? Because we talked about anomaly detection, and you have those bags coming through with those scanners, and what makes someone good at that, and what makes someone poor at that, and how does that relate to what we do? And the truth is a whole lot. So, I think we have been kind of in this bubble, and we're afraid to maybe get out of it. I think that's getting a little bit better. Certainly from a research perspective, we have more people doing that sort of thing beyond just myself, and I think we'll only see positive things from that.
Yeah, mentioning aviation, that really landed with me, because I remember one of my first jobs was internet tech support, dial-up tech support in the pre-broadband days. And I remember the best calls, the best people I ever had to deal with, because they can't test the fix unless they hang up with you on the phone, unless they had two phone lines. And in most cases, they didn't have two phone lines. So you would do your best to diagnose what their problem was without them ever being able to test whether or not you fixed it. And the absolute best people, I would ask them, I would get through this call, no problem. They'd follow my instructions exactly, wouldn't deviate from anything, would do exactly what I would tell them, word for word. And I'd ask them, what do you, I'm just curious, what do you do for a living? Commercial pilot every time. I always knew when I had a commercial pilot on the phone.
Yeah, very structured, very checklist oriented, systematic. Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm a big checklist fan. There's a lot of places those are really effective in what we do. Like, we're not going to checklist away every problem we have to solve, but procedures and repetitive tasks. We talk about making knowledge explicit. That's part of it.
Yeah. So one of the things I get frustrated with, I mentioned doing postmortems on companies, is the accessibility. You know, you're talking about conferences where, you know, these, you know, medical, you know, folks doing diagnoses in healthcare and things like that, sharing stuff. I wonder if you see that as one of the big challenges here is the lack of sharing. You know, the idea that companies, they're embarrassed, they're afraid of lawsuits and liability and things like that. Like, those are problems to overcome. But at the same time, I feel like, you know, when you look at maritime aviation, you know, they all share the incidents publicly. And a lot of times, you know, yeah, that's because people are dying. You know, it makes it a little bit more serious. But, you know, I feel like we're starting to get there with cybersecurity where we can be justified in saying, you know, starting to regulate and say, hey, like we need to understand, we need some details of how this happened so people can study it and learn from it. How close do you think we are to that? And how important do you think that is?
I mean, I think it's incredibly important, and we're not nearly close enough. You know, I teach an information security writing course for people writing forensic reports or pen test reports and things like that. And I remember when I was initially putting that together, I'm going out and I'm looking for examples, right? Both good and bad ones. And there's not really a lot of any of those to be found. Like, there are a few, but even the ones that I found are just so highly like modified or marketing's gotten a hold of them that they're just not really useful for that. So I ended up being able to get some just through colleagues and things like that, and could redact the sensitive stuff. But I mean, just think about that. Like, how many times can you go out on the internet right now and find a full, complete forensic report of an investigation that occurred for a government entity or a major company or something like that? And the answer is very rarely, and almost never happens, right? I remember when the Equifax hack happened, and then they had to go testify in front of Congress, and there was a report made from that, and everybody was just really excited because it was one of the first times that we've had such a detailed report about like an investigation and the actual process that people went through, at least in terms of the steps that were taken and when. And that's just a real shame, right? Like, if we want people to understand how to do these things better, be better analysts, we need to assess not only the process, but the output. And a lot of those final reports give insight into both of those things. So we need that. And I, you know, I understand like there's sensitive information, but like that can be redacted, right? Like, we don't have to list IP addresses and credentials and things like that. We're actually pretty good at that in a lot of places. So I do think we need some of that. I mean, companies are certainly not going to do it on their own. It's going to have to be legislated, probably. But I do think we need something like that. Some, you know, it has some accountability benefits as well, but just from an educational perspective or some type of collaborative that could get those types of things in, that is type of information sharing we need. And the important thing about talking information sharing is almost all those conversations get hijacked by conversations of like IOCs and sharing like threat intel type stuff. And, you know, that's cool, and we need to do that too, but that's in a lot better place than what I'm talking about. So you're absolutely right.
What do you think about the idea that I think Adam Shostak and Trey Ford and other people have been talking about for a long time, which is we need to report near misses, right? Companies might be more willing to talk about something that didn't end up being a full-on breach, and then they could have some kind of system just like, you know, FAA and NASA, where a pilot can report a near miss anonymously and get a receipt proving that he did report it in case he does get investigated for the near miss about by the FAA later on. Do you think that's an idea that could work or help?
I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, it all depends on how you classify a near miss and what that really entails. Is like just a false positive a near miss, or a near miss, does that mean someone got into the network but didn't actually achieve some sort of objective? I would say part of the problem is we don't have as many of those as well, right? By the time we usually detect people, not only are they in the network, but they've already achieved some sort of objective. So I guess, I don't know, devil's in the details on that one. But I'd be interested in learning more about it.
Yeah, I guess the idea of the near miss would be what you just described, which is like there was an incident, but the final objectives were not achieved. But I think you're right. There's a lot of successful attacks and probably fewer incidents successful successful removal of the attack before they reach their final objective. So you're probably right that there wouldn't be that much to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think at that point I would just like, give me the full incidents, and like that's going to have all the good stuff. I mean, I don't know, open to the idea.
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight, since you brought up the Equifax report, that House subcommittee report that came out. I think one of the things that made that report so valuable is that they interviewed some of the folks at Equifax. We got direct quotes from folks there. We got a sense of the culture there, the sense of the level of training of the employees, what they knew how to do, what they didn't know how to do. It wasn't just a list of IOCs and a timeline and the technical details of the steps that the attacker took. We got a really good view of the defenders and the state of the security program as well. And I think
absolutely. It was really just wide encompassing, and we got a lot of process details. And obviously people look at that report and they see failure, but there's failures, there's successes, there's good things, there's bad things. Like it's a whole lot of things that can just be learned from in the context of this. And particularly for folks like me who are educators, I mean, it's great because I can go into a classroom and now I can have discussions with people about these things. And I can say, oh, this person found out this piece of information and did this thing. Is that what they should have done? Let's talk about it. And then I can do this kind of whole Socratic thing where I'm not really telling them anything. I'm just asking the right question at the right time to let people come to their own conclusions, which is really helping them reinforce the things that they're learning and getting at it from different angles. They're bringing their own unique, diverse perspectives to things. And that's what the whole deal is all about, right? So from an educational perspective, that stuff is gold.
All right. As we wrap up this conversation, Katie, Guillaume, do you have any questions about barbecue? Can we end this on a non sequitur?
On barbecue? No, but I've been thinking about barbecue a lot because it's getting into, colder weather. So no questions, but hungry.
I see you. Yeah. I hear you and I see you. Yeah.
I would say my barbecue question would be, in what state do you live, and what's like a typical difference in the way people barbecue over there?
So I'm from Kentucky, lived in South Carolina for 5 years, and now been in Georgia for like 8 years. Georgia is pork. It's a lot of pulled pork. There's no good brisket to be found hardly here. Leave that to Texas. They do a great job. The pork here is great. The ribs are great. The pulled pork's great. Just the beef is a little sketch. The trick with beef is if it's cheap, it's not good. Like you got to start with the expensive stuff. If it's expensive and you say that seems too expensive, then it's probably going to be like, at least it's got a chance of being good. So that's where I'm at on that.
So whenever I go to Waffle House, my go-to is breakfast, regardless of what time I go there, and peppered, smothered, covered.
Like a true gentleman.
What's your go-to? What's going to be your go-to tonight?
So I'm always a breakfast person. I barely even acknowledge the dinner menu. I'm fine with people who do. It's just not for me. It's Texas sausage, egg, and cheese melt with the hash browns covered in chunks, so ham and cheese.
Awesome. Very good.
And here's the kicker. My son, and he's 4 years old, he goes with me and he gets the waffle. I don't really want a whole waffle, but he can't eat his whole waffle. So I can have 4 or 5 bites of his, which is the amount of waffle I want with all the other stuff that I'm eating.
Exactly. There's your dessert right there.
There you go.
All right, Chris, thank you so much for joining us in Enterprise Security Weekly today. It has been a delight.
Thank y'all for having me. Appreciate y'all.
All right, we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly Enterprise News. If you work in security or IT and your company has Okta, this message is for you. Imagine a world where only secure devices can access your cloud apps. In this world, phish credentials are useless to attackers, and you can manage every OS, even Linux, from a single dashboard. Best of all, you can get employees to fix their own device security issues without creating more work for IT. The good news is, you don't have to imagine this world. You can just start using Collide. Visit securityweekly.com/Collide to watch a demo today. That's securityweekly.com/KOLIDE. Do the words free time or relaxation sound foreign to you? Perhaps you've been stuck in the office too long, battling cyber threats or worrying about the next strain of ransomware. Let Sophos help provide peace of mind 24/7, 365 with cybersecurity delivered as a service. Because we want you to get back to your weekends, family dinners, and everything in between. And you'll get there with Sophos. Visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join us at SC Media's Investing in IAM eSummit, September 19th through 20th. This two-day virtual event will provide insights from industry experts with a deep dive into identity and access management. Register now for this free event where you will gain cybersecurity knowledge and receive 6.5 CPE credits just for attending. Register today at securityweekly.com/IAM. All right, and now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. If you want to follow along, you can go to securityweekly.com/ESW331. That will be the show notes for this entire episode, which includes the news segment and links to all the stories that we're going to talk about today. And some of my sometimes sarcastic, snide notes about some of the stories. All right. So we have some funding and we have some acquisitions. None of them are getting me all that excited to talk about. And we've got a ton of stuff to talk about here. So I might breeze through some of that. Just do some highlights here. Rapid7, which IPO'd many years ago. They've been public for a number of years. They did some a post-IPO debt raise. So another $260 million of equity that you can pick up there in Rapid7 if you like that company. No comments from Guillaume, who used to work there.
I mean, I still have I think they gave us a Kenneth Cole laptop bag when we did the IPO. I still have it somewhere in a closet. Never used it. I figured, one day that's going to be a collectible. And I also made like several dozens of dollars from the IPO. So I think, I'm conflicted. I cannot comment on this story.
Several dozens.
I mean, you could buy some Waffle House, right?
Amazing. I will use all those proceeds for some Waffle House.
Might also be able to get several dozens of dollars for that Kenneth Cole bag on eBay.
Yep. Yeah, I'm waiting. Huddle.
Hold on. Also notable, Lee Honeywell's Tall Poppy is among 23 companies funded by Morgan Stanley. So it's one of these things where they divide up. I don't know if it was like an accelerator or how exactly that works. I don't know a lot about the process, but it kind of feels like that, right? Like one of those accelerators where everybody gets $250,000 or $50K or something like that, and they go through like a 2-week process. It looks like maybe they just applied for it. Yeah, and it looks like maybe some additional benefits from Morgan Stanley opening up their ecosystem of partners, so they're going to help with lead generation. So it looks like
it is an accelerator program. What I found interesting is there's a few Canadian companies on the list. Some that I don't know. Sophos and AdOris, didn't really know these companies, and it was fun to see some Canadian tech companies out there. Yeah.
I missed the fact that they have the country that each company is headquartered in. There's an Estonian one on there, a few UK, Uganda. Yeah, very cool. Let's see. Acquisitions, SafeBase acquiring Staxi. SafeBase, they've raised a decent amount of money. I'm guessing any of the acquisitions that we see, I think, are all going to be good deals for the buyers, less so for the sellers in this market. So it's kind of my assumption, because we don't really get any deal amounts anyway. So to me, that's another sign that the companies getting bought aren't making a huge bank. That the amount is not material to having to report for some of these companies that are public, like Checkpoint acquired Atmosec. Tenable picked up a vendor called Hermetic. Sometimes we find out like the next 10Q or 10K, they'll have the amount in there, and we'll eventually find out how much they paid. But none of these were in the press releases.
When there's a public company that's involved, right? If it's going to be two privately owned companies and they don't disclose it, we'll probably never know. But that one I think is interesting, like SafeBase and Staxi, for security reviews. I think it could be a pretty good fit. We use SafeBase at Jupiter One, and it's a nice product, and that's a different feature that maybe is going to fit well in there. So, it's nice to see people buying things that might actually be useful yet fit with their existing product and company, right? Like, it doesn't feel like just, okay, we're acquiring 62 things because we're trying to do everything as fast as possible, and then you'd never know how well integrated it's going to be. And so this one, I'm actually cautiously optimistic. I think if they integrate it properly, it might be a win for customers. So
yeah, I met those folks at because the company I work for was in Innovation Sandbox, and I believe the SafeBase folks were also there. They're one of the 10 companies, so I got to meet them there. Yeah, so with public companies, even they don't have to share the amount if it's low enough. If they determine that it's not material. So sometimes you'll see that they'll throw it into the next 10Q or something like that, but you won't see an 8K for it. Sometimes you never see it, because I do go back and check occasionally on some of these. The IronNet drama looks like it may have completed. They've furloughed workers. They're exploring bankruptcy. I don't know. It's been there's been a lot of drama with that. There's lawsuits against the company. Accusations, different kinds. They went public via SPAC. There's not a whole lot of success companies for businesses in general that went public via SPAC, even less for cybersecurity companies. I think ZeroFox is still doing okay. They haven't been delisted, but their price they're trading at is fairly low. So yeah, we'll see. For IronNet, it doesn't look like it's there's going to be much of a happy ending here.
It's just been such a mess from the start, and I know that the SPAC craze was pretty big for a while, but to me, it's just a word of caution that it's one thing you want to make your company go. It's one thing you want to try new ways of investment and making sure that your business is on track. But at least, again, for me personally, it's a word of caution to not try something 100% that hasn't been tested and vetted in the marketplace, because there really just hasn't been a lot of evidence that this was ever going to work well. So,
it felt to me like, how you can storage places auction off like abandoned storage units. That's how SPACs kind of felt to me. Like you were investing in something you didn't know anything about. You couldn't do any due diligence on it. It was a pure gamble. And, as a tool to avoid scrutiny and due diligence, you got exactly what you would expect to get. You would get companies going public that didn't want scrutiny or due diligence for some reason. So, after the SEC changed some rules, I forget exactly what they changed to make SPACs less attractive. It looks like companies are just going to go back to the classic S1 path, filing an S1 and going IPO. So they can still do there still is an option for a private S1 path. I think you can still do that, where the S1 isn't public. And S1 being the document you have to file before going IPO, not to be confused with Sentinel-1. I've seen that confusion happen in a few places online. So just to be clear, we're not talking about Sentinel-1. We're talking about the S1 document you file with the SEC.
Yes, that's an important distinction, for sure.
It is. I found that out the other day. Let's see. So there's a new open source tool, Hopper. I forget. I think this came from Lockheed Martin, maybe. Yeah, it's a SBOM and Secure Software Supply Chain Utility Kit. Beyond that, I don't know a ton about it.
Yeah, it seems to be really focused around, all this supply chain security, supply chain management, which is pretty hot topic. We've been talking about SBOMs for years now, and the tooling is finally starting to, be coming together. Producing them has gotten pretty easy depending on your environment. Of course, consuming them and figuring out what to do with all of the information, it probably not as easy yet, but it's nice to see more open source tools around that. So companies that don't have all the resources to develop this custom stuff can reuse that without having to spend money on commercial solutions.
Yeah. Anywhere you guys from this point, we could jump pretty much anywhere. We don't have to go through this in order. Are there any particular ones that grabbed you that you want to discuss next?
The Gmail one, actually. So Google now has a feature that will essentially do like second factor verification when you do specific sensitive actions, right? So for example, you set up a new mail forwarding rule, which is something that happens pretty often when an email account is compromised, right? Like they set up the mail forwarding rules so that they can keep receiving the stuff even if you reset your password. I think this is great. I also want to mention, if anyone out there is a Google Workspace admin, there's many things in Google Workspace that don't have full API support, so you can't really terraform your entire Google Workspace configuration. However, they just released, and I think it's still beta, so it's still rolling out. You may or may not have it yet. Multi-party approval for admins. So you can now make it so a single Google administrator is not enough to change some of the critical security features. And I think that is super important because we know like people will target a person that they know has administrator access to something like Office 365, Google Workspace that gives so much access into a company. So it's really cool that they're releasing that. I think they announced it 3 weeks ago, but it was, within one of these blog posts about like Duet AI. It's like 62 new AI features, and then at the bottom, multi-party approval. And felt like I was the only person in the world that was more excited for that than any of the AI features. Like, yay, finally.
So like M of N support, where me and you have to turn the key to add a new user. Like what's an example of something you'd use multi-party support for? What's like a really sensitive operation you would want to do? You that
turn off. You change your requirements for two-factor, for example. Then you will need multi-party approval, right? So I'll change it, and then someone's going to get a notification. They'll have to log in and go approve it. So actually, it is in preview. So they've shown it. There's screenshots of it, but I don't think most customers have it yet. So keep an eye on it, and as soon as you get it, turn it on.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's one of those, like, I'm surprised it took this long for that to show up. I haven't seen that in anything else either.
Well, I mean, you can do it on anything that's infrastructure as code, right? Like the idea is you put the infrastructure code in, let's say, GitHub repository. You make sure you have code reviews on that, and you make sure that
but then it's not a SaaS
anything that can go and make the actual change.
Multi-party process yourself, right?
Right. But because Google Workspace, it's not everything that can be automated in the Google Workspace configuration, at least not easily and cleanly, then this is really good. This is also really good for anyone who, there's so many companies using something like Google Workspace that just don't have the resources to be able to use something like Terraform, right? Like it's not going to happen. And so now that's pretty good solution for those. So yay.
It's great. It's like a security check at a bank, right? Like if you go into a bank vault, you've got to have 2 different keys to get into the bank vault. It makes sense. Sometimes these changes might not necessitate such governance, but it's a good best practice.
I think the probably most similar thing that I see quite frequently is actually controls for controlling how much money a company can wire, for example. So if you have we just said, Rapid7 is probably going to have $260 million in the bank soon, right? Like, you just know scammers will start targeting them. And so I assume they have some tools that will say you cannot wire $260 million to one account without, multiple approvals. Most business banking solutions support that. But in terms of IT products, it's actually fairly rare. The only time I'd seen that as like a feature that's pretty easy to enable without requiring some infrastructure as code or automation has actually been in the finance space, either like banking products or like I've worked in banking quite a bit. So a lot of like the back end tools that you aren't exposed to as a customer, some of them have that. But then it's more like ERPs, right? Like, oh, you have the permission to approve a check, but then you're not going to have the permission to print it as well, right? So it's that segmentation of duty, in a way, just made a little simpler.
Yeah, I still have a credit union account set up that way where I can't do anything with the account, even deposit money without giving them a password. As soon as they pull up my account, there's a note on it that says, "Hey, they have to answer this password before they can do anything."
Yeah, I know. I tried to give you a few bucks the other day, and I didn't know the password. Could not deposit.
You're supposed to send crypto. Why are you using a credit union? But yeah, it was a big feature for CASB. So this is one of I remember back when I was an industry analyst and CASB was just coming out. This is one of the big use cases that I don't think a lot of people used. But the example they like to use is, okay, if I'm going into Paychex or ADP or something like that and changing somebody's salary, we want to do this step-up authentication. It says, hey, just to make sure we're also sending this there, and somebody's got to approve
salary
that
or the bank account it goes to, right? Like the amount of emails I've seen in the last 10 years just saying like, "Hi, this is Adrian. Yeah. I'm on vacation. Please make sure my next paycheck goes to this random bank account," right? Like,
I can give you my bank account number if you'd like to do that. Yeah. We can just funnel it through there.
I wouldn't want to run afoul of some international money laundering law accidentally. So.
That's why you got to use crypto. Come on, Gil. There's no borders anymore.
There's no laws.
So Katie, anything you want to jump to?
The CISA ones are pretty interesting. The Federal Programs Risky Biz announcement about CISA providing free security scans to utilities. Obviously, I want a little more detail into that and what it means, but we certainly need this kind of collaboration and cooperation, and I think it's great to be focusing on these public utilities that don't have the wherewithal, they don't necessarily have the budget, and it's a big risk.
The open source one as well, right? I thought when the White House released their like new cyber strategy, or I forget what it's the exact name of it was. What was it? Like 6 months ago? I don't know. Like
I think it was just COVID, the National Cybersecurity Strategy. Yeah.
And one of the things I thought was missing in there was they just really didn't talk much about open source. So like, I don't know, like a devil's in the detail. We're going to see, is it really going to be useful? But for open source to be more of a focus there, I think that's great, because there's so many of these tools that everyone is using, so many libraries that everyone is using, and you don't know, right? Like it could be maintained by just a few volunteers. Sometimes only one person is really committing to it, and that's not great. So I'm pretty happy about that too. It's nice to have a week where we have probably more good news than bad news.
Yeah, I think this is, the thing with open source is it's so prevalent. We're never going to get to all of it. So any little step forward is a good step forward for not just the community, but for businesses.
Yeah, and for the vulnerability one, it looks like CISA basically runs like a scanning service, that you can purchase, subscribe to. I'm not sure how any of that works, in terms of cost centers within the government, or how you get access to it. But kind of cool that they're
supposed to be free, right? Like you're not supposed to have to pay for that, I think.
Right. Free access to its vulnerability scanning service to the operators of public U.S. water and wastewater utilities. This is completely voluntary. Water utilities that sign up will receive a weekly status report with details about the exposed systems and vulnerabilities that will need to be patched. As Guillaume just said, the devil's in the details. You can say, hey, here are 1,000 things that are wrong. And if they don't have the capability to patch any of those, then it's information without action. But this hopefully will lead to greater awareness, perhaps some budget for attending to this, some skills building. We were just talking about that in the last section. Hopefully
we live in this world, right? Like we know, like if you have a big enough network, there's 15,000, there's 1 million vulnerabilities or whatever. Like that doesn't surprise us because we have the experience. We've been exposed to all of this. But if someone out there was not doing any type of vulnerability scanning because they didn't have the budget for it, right, and they don't know that, like, oh wow, having SMB exposed to the internet and like remote desktop and like unpatched remote desktop, these types of things, and maybe that's the first time they ever see a vulnerability scan, it might make them realize that, okay, there's actually some work that needs to be done here. So I think this is not a lot of security people are going to see this service, right? Because a company that has a security team probably already has tools to do that. So I think it's going to expose some IT people to, one type of security tool. So, why not? We'll see. It might just generate, as you say, a lot of information and not a lot of action in terms of fixing things. But, it's more information.
And I think at least at the beginning, this will target some low-hanging fruit like OpenSMB. They might not be able to patch some critical systems that were OT systems, legacy systems that can't be patched easily, or some interconnectivity issues might arise. But at very least, it will hopefully, as long as they have a diligent IT or security team, it will close up some of the lower gaps so that eventually they can start putting programs together to target more thorough proactive security programs that includes an actual patching program or things of that nature.
And the other benefit here is, I presume they're doing some prioritization for them as well, because the CISA also manages the known exploited vulnerabilities list, which is like a short list of really, really bad stuff. That's, if you have in your environment, is going to lead to a very bad day with some kind of ransomware crew. So if they can already do some of that work for them, rather than just hand them a spreadsheet of a billion things, unsorted things, like that's really going to help out these guys a lot more. Because it done wrong, this could be just another problem for them. Right. Oh, you're welcome. Here's an 863-page report of vulnerabilities. Like no action is ever going to be taken on that, by the two IT people that work at this one public water utility, right?
I got 99 problems and a security team ain't one because I don't got one. At least in the thing they outlined here, there is an execution that CISA performs a scan and then they rescan based on criticality of identified vulnerabilities. And then they do deliver some reports with recommendations. Again, if there isn't a security team that can handle it, what are we going to do? Are we just going to scare the bejesus out of a lot of utilities? Maybe. But I assume at this stage, most major utility companies have at least some form of security help, whether it's internal or external through an MSSP or what have you. Guillaume's making faces. For those of you who can't see, he's looking skeptical at my last statement, or he's reading something totally different.
No, I just I was actually looking at the screenshot of the UI, and so for utilities, I don't have a good understanding of how many smaller utility providers are out there, right? Like, I'm from Montreal, or water or like electricity, all that is run by the government. And so we have one power company and one gas company. So they're all very, very big. I guess it's probably different in the US, right?
It is. So,
yeah. I have those stats. Give me a second and I'll find those stats, because I actually did that research a couple years ago. And it's
and while you're looking that up, I'll describe the UI a little bit for people who are listening, and can't just click the link and check it out. But one of the things they put on the top left of the report, pretty much top left, is potentially risky open services. But then the other thing I like is they show the percentage, the change in vulnerable hosts, right? So I assume that'll be plus 50%, minus 50%. But I think the most telling part of this UI is you look at the bottom right, potentially risky open services, and then it totally focuses on RDP, FTP, RPC, SQL, LDAP, Kerberos, and put the funniest one in there in that list is IRC. Why is IRC one of these? There's only 10 ports that they're highlighting here. So there has to be a reason why IRC is one of them. And I want to know, it was someone doing a command and control by running the IRC server on the breach side? Or is it just because some people set up some really old IRC servers to actually communicate internally within the company, right? Like, people joke that Slack is just IRC with GIFs. So is it because utilities have been using IRC and accidentally exposing that to the internet? If anyone knows, I'd love to know why IRC is one of the top 10.
Maybe there's some acronym collision there, and IRC has a different meaning in that kind of environment.
I don't know. The port number is not listed, so
right.
I guess the only way to find out is we open up our own water utility, and then we open a few ports and we wait to see if it's 6667.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm having trouble finding that. I posted there is a Twitter thread where I go through the number of electric utilities and water utilities. It's a huge number, and a lot of them are, like, in some places they're entirely volunteers. There's no FTEs, no full-time employees in the water utilities at all. It's like the same guy who's the fire chief also runs the the water treatment plant or something like that.
Yeah, I figured there's so many variations in how all the different states are run. Like, I can't really keep track, right, as someone who lives in a different country. But I figured you probably had a lot. Like, even other Canadian provinces, I don't know how it is. Maybe we have a ton. But I think water is probably the one that we have the most of, because a lot of it is municipal. And so there's a lot of smaller cities that probably don't have a huge staff. So I think it's more likely here to be water more than, not like a power company without a security team.
I just asked, I do have a spreadsheet somewhere that lists all of them, but I just asked ChatGPT. I went the quick route, and it says there's over 50,000. So I just Googled,
and it said of the more than 151,000 public water systems in the United States, 97%, 146,767 are considered small water systems.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So ChatGPT was wrong, but I mean, yeah, it's a lot is basically what we were looking for there. It's a very difficult to manage number, and you have to understand that to understand the kind of undertaking that CISA is taking here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just before we jump to some of the Sean, we actually have some hot takes here. I think we've got a dumpster fire as well if you want to prep some graphics, but not there quite yet. I wanted to talk about number 20, which I found fascinating because this was a breach that Brazil did to themselves. They apparently shared some sensitive data of their citizens with private industry, with banks and private financial institutions, and basically a judge said that they've got to pay the 15,000 reais, the equivalent of $3,000 US, to everyone whose data was purposely leaked. And that's like 3.7 million people's data. So it comes up to $11 billion, which I did some more research and found that's more than the estimated damage of NotPetya and WannaCry. And so possibly this could be the biggest breach ever. But chatting with some of my Brazilian friends, I found that, even though the judge has said this, it could take years for them to pay this out. Brazil does this thing where it'll pay people when it has surpluses, so you got to wait until the government has some extra money to pay out. So who knows when you get this, or if you get all of it, it's kind of not a real solid number.
I don't think it qualifies as the most expensive breach because it's not really a breach, right? Like it's misuse of data, but it's more like a
intentional data leak.
Well, it's like a business decision that was probably not quite legal or something like that, but it's not a breach.
Yeah, that sounds like malicious attack or gross negligence.
It was self-inflicted.
There was no attacker.
But when the attacker's you, why are you hitting yourself?
It still applies, right?
It's a lot of data anyway, so.
A lot of data. And people are probably not, some people might not live long enough to actually get their payout, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, but for once, it's what, $3,000 per person, right? Which is a nice change from all these class action lawsuits that result in me receiving an email saying, if you bought a TV in 1996, you could get up to 17 cents.
What's really funny is I was thinking 17 cents before you said that. No, I'm not kidding. I was thinking, that's weird. Okay.
I'm probably basing it on some actual class action that was literally 17 cents. Maybe we both kind of remember that. I don't know.
Maybe. I definitely haven't gotten 17 cents because I figured the paperwork and all the time it takes me to fill out the paperwork to get my 17 cents. It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've passed on a couple of those. But yeah, I mean, the thing here is all the people whose data was leaked were generally people in poverty. So like 15,000 reais is kind of a big deal. Like that's a significant chunk of an annual salary at minimum wage.
Yeah. So it's a actual, I mean, even from the incentive to not do this in the future, when you see fines like that's way different than seeing, let's say, a huge, I'm not going to name names, but huge bank, with massive breaches, and then the only thing they end up doing is buying, a couple years of Equifax for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's more like a cost of doing business. This is bigger.
And it will have a substantive impact on people, a very positive substantive impact if they do follow through.
All right, let's move on to hot take number 1. Kelly Shortridge wants to know, why are you logging into production hosts in 2023?
Yep.
Guillaume?
So that was a good, I mean, to me, it's not a hot take. It's just, why? Why are you doing that? That being said, that's easy to say, as someone who's worked for companies building brand new products in the cloud, automation, and all of that. If you work for one of these utilities we just mentioned, 10 minutes ago, then obviously you're going to be logging into production, because I don't think there's like APIs and Terraform and CI/CD for like MATLAB or like all the stuff that must be running in there. So obviously, this is targeted more to tech companies. Like if you're a fintech, you should not have people even be able to log into production. If you have a lot of sensitive data from your customers, you should not have people be able to log in production unless it's like a super emergency. But what I found really funny were just some of the responses. I think a lot of people just completely missed it. It was not an actual question. It's more like, why are you doing it? You should be working on stopping that. And I saw a lot of some very weird responses. But yeah, that's like the most bang for the buck security control you can get, is just making sure that there's no way inside a system so that it is immutable, right? The point with containers is they're supposed to be immutable. Detecting that there's a new executable in a container, a new library, something weird is way easier than on a big system. There's smaller attack surface. But if you're going to open up SSH and have people logging into it to troubleshoot stuff, then what's the point, right? So yeah, not a hot take I disagree with at all.
Perhaps not even a hot take. All right.
I guess it depends on from what point of view you're seeing it. I guess some people did consider it a hot take, but to me, that's good practice and should be standard.
So we have an 8K from Caesars, the hotel and casino chain. An 8K is what you file with the SEC when something happens to your company that maybe your shareholders would be interested in knowing. I think the term is material event. And the language in it, we don't know for sure, but it highly suggests that they paid a ransom within the rumor, the grapevine. I've heard they paid around $30 million. MGM, I'm guessing, did not pay the ransom because they have a bunch of stuff that's broken and offline still, whereas I haven't heard the same about Caesars. And so I'm wondering, so also that 8K describes an outsourced IT support vendor getting social engineered, which sounds suspiciously close to the story coming out of MGM as well, which was also leaked supposedly from the attacker to VX Underground on Twitter, suggesting that maybe there's a chance that the same IT support vendor was the path into both of these large hotels and casinos.
Could be a shared vendor, but could also be, once you've seen the success you got targeting one of them, then why not go after all similar companies, right?
Mm-hmm. We can go to
combination of both, right?
This kind of qualifies as dumpster fires. We can change the graphic to that. Here we go. We can just leave this one on for a bit for the next couple of stories. But yeah, and there has been a trend of that, right? Of attackers going bang for your buck. Like, why hack the company directly when you can hack the company, a company that has access to a whole bunch, and then you have your pick of who you want to jump into.
I mean, as much as when you work in security, it feels like things are not improving much because we're always focusing on like what happened this week, what do we have to do? But if we look over like 10, 15 years, things have improved in many different areas. And I think if like the average level of security of most companies keeps going up a little bit, I think a lot of it just because they're using SaaS tools that are harder to, that you don't have to maintain to patch, they're not exposing their IRC servers on the internet, then it just becomes obvious that attacking the vendor is going to be more bang for the buck because it might be harder to compromise them. But once you're in, you're in.
Right.
To a lot.
Yeah, much better payout. Yeah. Let's see. So we got the dumpster fire one up. That is particularly for number 26, which apparently there's been a rash of just really, really bad CVEs getting filed. So the quality of CVEs and just the fact that these were filed as CVEs at all should be questioned. And thankfully, somebody's actually watching this kind of stuff because honestly, there's so many CVEs every year, 20,000 plus that tend to get filed and published. I don't think there's any one person looking at all of them.
There's also been a few weeks ago, didn't someone report a CVE in like WebGoat or some app that's vulnerable by design, right? The app is made to have SQL injection, and someone reported CVEs for that. I don't, I haven't kept up. I don't know if it's just someone as a joke or just wanted to put the CV number in a resume or whatever. And then a lot of people started complaining about that we shouldn't be submitting CVEs to apps that are made to be vulnerable. But at the same time, I'm thinking it's actually not that bad of a problem in that case, because if you do have that running somewhere, now it kind of acts as like a ICAR test file for your vulnerability scanner in a way, right? So I could see that, but that's a different case from this one, which are actually like bad CVEs and really bad CVSS scores as well, right? It's like 9.8, and this is just we don't need that kind of noise. But it just goes to show that it's 2023 and vulnerability management is still very difficult. We don't have a lot of context, and the little data that we have is not even necessarily great in most cases, right? Like, who remembers that Heartbleed was not a super crazy CVSS score because it was air quote only information disclosure. So this is more of that. And I don't know who's submitting all of these bugs, but please stop. I think you have enough CVEs in your resume now.
Yeah, 138 in one day. These were all.
That's a lot of time. I mean, just
it's probably just people running scanners, right?
But the assumption is that maybe AI is being used to just scrape these and auto write up. You can have AI do the whole thing except for hitting the submit button, pretty much.
Why couldn't it?
And nobody's
the
reviewing these for quality. Nobody who's validating these before they get published.
Well, a lot of these projects, they don't have dedicated security people, right? And so when they see stuff like that, it just makes every security person out there look bad, right? Because you've got people maintaining open source projects, and their experience maintaining open source projects, like part of that, and having talked to people who maintain open source projects, and I used to work at Fleet, open source company, you get these really bad vulnerability reports, and in some cases the conversation even goes like not super well. The person is not really explaining things properly, and it almost feels like a threat or extortion. You're like, okay, so what is happening here? Why are you threatening me with this? And because of that, when you have actual security researchers who want to do the right thing, there's a lot of these companies that don't have a security team, don't have that much experience with good security people. They're just going to be on the defensive, right? So you'll submit something good, and it's like, whatever, the last 19 CVEs we got were complete junk, not exploitable, and no one cares. It's like if I submitted, I don't know, like a CVE to Netcat to say that, like, oh, it doesn't use TLS by default. Like, that's not the point of the tool. That's not a vulnerability, right? But so if they get used to receiving junk like that, then they will not listen to the good reports. So yeah, definitely has to stop. Yeah. I don't know how we stop it, but
yeah.
So if you say it's AI, then all we need is like some CAPTCHA asking you to pick the school buses from a photo, and then we're good, right?
Right. All right. Let's see. What's next here? Let's see. Yeah, so there was some more information released about Microsoft's the breach they had that been attributed to Storm 0558, which is apparently China, where, again, same type of issue. Instead of hacking these companies' emails individually, they just went after Microsoft, found a way to produce their own keys to get into pretty much any customer accounts that they wanted to, running on Microsoft 365, and chose these 25 particular accounts, which had a lot in common. U.S. government, both U.S. government accounts and U.S. government contractors. So they released some more information, basically found a bunch of issues with their internal processes that they say they've improved. But the thing that kind of fell flat with me is there's still no detail on how the attackers got into or got access to these Microsoft employees in the first place. And, if they can't secure their own employees, the concern here is, how can they expect us to handle these kinds of attacks if they don't even have any logging information or data on how this happened? At least that's my
don't
take.
Know. Do they not have it, or have they not told us? But I think the weirdest part of it for me is, okay, there was a race condition that caused a crash in some service, and a key ended up in some crash dump, and that crash dump eventually made it to like a troubleshooting environment and whatever. So that part, totally can see that happening. By the way, good case for automated key rotation, because you think keys are not supposed to leak, but there's always going to be something weird with like a crash somewhere or whatever. So if you can automate that, then reduce the risk a little bit.
Unexpected things are going to happen, right?
Exactly. But what here's memory, right? Like here's a big bunch of memory dump. You're going to find weird things in there that shouldn't necessarily be made available in these environments. But what I don't understand is, it feels to me like this is less likely than winning the lottery if the scenario was you compromised one machine and it happened to have that on it, right? It's like, I just wanted to deploy a crypto miner and I accidentally hacked into 25 government entities because I saw a dump and it happened to have this key, and I tried to forge Azure or 365 tokens with it. So I'm wondering, what is the real scenario? Were there more machines that were compromised? Did that last for a long time? I think it's also not that likely, because if I remember right, that breach was discovered by a customer that was looking at their Office 365 logs, right? And I'm thinking, if someone compromised, a couple hundred Windows machines at Microsoft to look for this type of stuff over a certain period of time, Microsoft probably would have detected it first. And so I think we're missing information. I would love to know more about it, just from I'm very curious about how did that really play out, because I just don't think it can be pure luck. I mean, if it was really pure luck, there's like a junior APT engineer that got promoted to VP of ownage 2 days later, right? Like it just doesn't make much sense. But it's a really interesting attack path. I think if you're a cloud vendor, definitely people are going to be looking for your crash dump. So time to deploy some Yara rules to find the crash dumps in places you don't expect them.
Right. Yeah, and this is so it sounds like there's probably going to be some larger investigations into it, maybe by the U.S. government. So we might get a much more detailed report 18 months from now, 2 years from now. I think it took about 18 months for the Equifax one we were talking about with Chris Sanders to come out after the actual incident occurred. So, but this probably isn't the last that we've heard of this.
Yeah, most likely not. Looking forward to it.
I want to talk about number 27, and then we'll jump to our squirrel story, and we'll wrap up. But number 27 is a big one. It's not really cybersecurity, but definitely adjacent in many, many, many ways to cybersecurity, right? Because privacy is, tends to fall under. Would you say that tends to fall under the purview of the CISO more often or less often? Guillaume?
In many cases it does, and I think if it's a big consumer product brand, though, you will usually have a person that's specifically responsible for privacy. And I think like cars are pretty much consumer goods, right? Especially with like all these features. We're not talking about trucks sold for companies only. This is in every car. I just love they didn't shy away from the words here. Modern cars are a privacy nightmare in bold. And it's interesting because I think it's something that like we all kind of, we know, right? Like I never did any research into that, but that cars that are connected to the internet are going to be a privacy nightmare, right? Your like GPS data is always going to be uploaded back. That's probably not going to be protected super well from like a privacy protection. Who can get access to that? if law enforcement wants that data, will they really require the right due process and a warrant and all that? I just always assume it was a train wreck, but it's probably worse than we assume. So it's really nice to see someone that actually did the work. Yeah. And then you just scroll through, and it's like you look at the logos, and you're like, okay, so which brand is not there, right? And you would have to really look for it to find one, and then you realize, like, oh no, actually that brand went bankrupt. They don't exist anymore. That's why they're not there. It's pretty much every single one. The weirdest thing in it, though, is not like we all feel like, yeah, sure, they're spying on location data, right? Like they're just uploading that and it's there and it's stored. Will they use it for marketing purposes? Whatever. That's the kind of stuff we assume will happen. Why do you have brands going and specifically mentioning that the data they collect might include information about your sexual activity? Yeah. Do they want to improve like the back seat on their cars based on how the cars are being used? I don't know, but I found it so weird to see that in there. And I'm thinking, is it a case of like copy pasta? Like people are copy pasting different privacy policies and then just like adding everything to be sure everything is in there? It's really weird.
So it's a bit of important context we should mention here is a lot of this is just analysis of the privacy policies that these car companies have published. So they're reading the words that these car companies put together that was approved by lawyers with language like, we can collect information about your sex life. That was actually approved and went out. Somebody said,
I figured they just want to be sure that they cover 100% of everything, right? Like, oh, it wasn't there. You approved that when you started the car the first time. I don't know. It's like these 60-page long end-user license agreements when you just want to install a new app, right? Like no one actually reads that. Well, now someone did. Thank you, Mozilla.
Well, it's not even just installing a new app. It's worse than that.
No, this is way worse, right? Because you've bought the car by the time you see that, right? Like it's done. And also, stuck. What are you going to do? Buy one of the other brands that also does the same thing?
Yeah.
So how big is the insurance company wanting you to have a dongle in your car industry in the U.S.? That's something that's picking up here, where the insurance company wants you to report GPS data so they can adjust your rates based on your driving.
Yeah, so Progressive, and it's not a dongle anymore. So that's built into the car. So all they need is like the VIN of your. I don't know how they set it up because I don't own a car that can do that. But I do know you no longer need the OBD2 dongle because they can do it direct from the car. The car company can basically just pipe that information straight to the insurance company. And I'm not sure how broad it is, but I think Progressive was the one that started with it. And I think it has extended out to others. I don't think my car insurance company does that. So I don't have a good sense of how common that is these days.
Because there's a weird double standard where when we started getting things like speed cameras, right? Red light cameras, there was actually debate around the privacy implications of that, right? Because now there's a camera that saw you drive through and it has to do OCR on your license plate. And now I can say, okay, so the Adrian's car was at that place at 8:33, whatever. Maybe I see your face in a photo. They started blanking them at some point. But then you have the insurance companies that are going to collect all that, and then the car companies that are just collecting all of that anyway, right? So what does it even matter?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, definitely worth a read if you own or are planning on owning a modern vehicle. There's a lot of good details in there. Not
you
a whole
can sign
lot
a petition as well.
Yeah. Not a whole lot that you can do about it. Aside from signing that petition, it's just like if you want a modern car, it's very unlikely that you'd be able to avoid this. Almost everybody's doing it. Nobody got a good grade, in other words, on privacy. And so jumping down to, and this is 31 and 34 are kind of connected. We can go ahead and call this the squirrel story. But yeah, we're now starting to see tools that help you detect audio, and I think I've seen ones for video as well, help detect deep fakes. But then number 34 is about a service intended for you to create your own deep fake, to kind of like, I guess if you have enough, if there's enough video or audio files of you and your voice, say, I don't know, you do 3 hours of a podcast every week and publish all that to YouTube, you can create a virtual avatar of someone. So if that's something you want, if you want Adrian to live on forever, making dad jokes and fart jokes, I guess technology has reached that point. I don't know why you want to.
Black Mirror, but I think the detection of voice deepfake or audio deepfake, that's going to be a cat and mouse game for a while, right? Because there's banks that use actual voice biometric stuff.
Yeah.
I have no idea, like scientifically, how effective that was to begin with, but I would assume that it's getting harder and harder to do voice biometrics, especially over phone. You call your friend who's on LTE or 5G, you're on LTE or 5G, you get HD, but you call a company, it always sounds like crap, right? So the bandwidth there is like everything is compressed. So how do they really identify you when there's like all these tools to simulate your voice? I just wish more companies would have two-factor for any type of support, right? Like and actually there's a few banks that do it now. When you go to the branch, unfortunately it's usually SMS, but they will send you a two-factor code to your phone to identify you. I think when I call my phone company, they should send a push notification to an app on my phone, and I can say, yes, I want, Marie from support to have access to my account for 30 minutes, because it's just like we are not going to be able to identify people over audio for long.
Amazon does that, and I think T-Mobile does that when you call in. So more sensitive services, anything in financial services should certainly do that. And I know at least two of the companies that I have accounts with that are, kind of important, use the quote voice recognition as the security factor. But yeah, you're right. It's not even just the different networks. What if I'm on the road in my car and there's road noise? What if I'm in the grocery store and there's background noise? Like all of that affects. What if I have a cold like I do today and my voice isn't exactly the same and the intonation is a little bit different? All of that matters. And with deepfakes, it's just so easy. And yeah, the SMS isn't perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than just, oh, you sound like you might be Katie. My sister sounds like me, for Christ's sake. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I was impressed. I sent a wire transfer recently, and they asked me for 2 forms of ID, my ATM card with the PIN, and then they sent me a PIN over SMS, and I had to read it to them. So I was like, the first time I went to a banking location where it felt that it wasn't 100% based on, I've seen this guy before. It's got to be legit, right? So it's just going to get worse with the voice biometrics. And the thing that sucks is a lot of companies are using voice biometrics because security questions are not secure, right? You ask me for my mom's maiden name, everyone can find that, right? Like what's the first car you had or whatever. This is not safe. And so companies start throwing on the voice biometrics on top of that to help. But I don't think it'll last for a long time. So I guess we probably have a few years where there's going to be these vendors making tools to detect deepfake audio, probably in real time, right? There'll probably be a market for a while, but I don't think it can go on forever. I think at some point the fake stuff is just going to be so good.
Well, and you pointed out the problem with that is that the first time we saw a service like this, we talked about it in the show, and it was paste in some text and it'll tell you the likelihood that the text was AI generated. And I got excited about it, and I looked into it a little bit further, and I found, okay, so that's the free tool. The pay tool that they sell is to paste in that text and make it undetectable by their tool that detects whether or not it's, so to be able, the moment you figure out how to detect if something's a deep fake, you also unlock the ability to then modify it so that it can't be detected as a deep fake, right?
Right, and that's why I'm saying I don't think it's sustainable, right? Like in the short term, sure, but
yeah, not directly at least. Maybe indirect methods, like again, like we were talking about.
So just to be clear, you were really challenging people to make deep fakes of you making fart jokes. I think that's verbatim what you said.
That is not what I said.
I just want to make sure everyone heard.
But at some point in the future, so the name of the company is Delphi, like somebody's going to have the idea, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could have grandma at the Thanksgiving table after she's gone, and somebody's going to show up and just be horrified. Like, it's just, I don't know that that's a good idea. Like I know in some places, like it was, what was it, Egypt, where it was traditional, pull out the mummified remains and sit them at the table for certain, special days of the year. It's like the digital equivalent of
Black Mirror episode is bound to become reality, whether it's a good idea or not. So
yeah, that's the problem. Is good idea is not a requirement when getting funding for a startup. It's just, will it make money? So we'll see. And with that, thanks so much, Guillaume and Katie, for joining me today. It's a lot of fun news items to talk about today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me this time.
Yep. And a big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We will be back next week. Bye-bye.